Welcome to the Sophist Edge. I'm your love and life coach, Victorya Rogers, with Sex Therapist Debby Wade. And this week, desire is the topic. In fact, desire discrepancy is what we're going to cover. But first, if you want to subscribe to our channel, click below so you can be informed every time we have something coming up. And we want to give a shout out to Life Network for Women and Paula White for having us streamed on your network. We are so honored to be a part of your team. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Sophist Edge. I'm your love and life coach, Victorya Rogers, with Sex Therapist Debby Wade. And today we are diving into desire discrepancy. Every marriage will have at some point, if not frequently or occasionally, an issue with desire discrepancy. What am I talking about, Debby? I'm sure you hear this.
It's the most prevalent problem that walks into a sex therapist's office is desire discrepancy. And to be honest, if we just look at couples in general, there is almost always, I know that sounds, but almost always a higher desire spouse and a lower desire spouse. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't mean a too high desire spouse or a too low of a desire spouse. Just typically when we come into marriage, there is a higher desire and a lower desire spouse. And we typically don't recognize it's going to be that way, right, because in the beginning, infatuation stage of a relationship, and you both can't wait to see each other and can't keep your hands off each other. Yeah. And it doesn't matter how you did sex prior to marriage, whether you abstained and followed some guidelines and held yourself accountable for values and virginity into marriage, or whether you had a pretty promiscuous lifestyle. That's usually whatever we've experienced prior to marriage is not a good measure of what we are going or how we're going to experience sex in marriage.
It's really true that the minute the commitment happens, you walk down the aisle and you're now husband and wife, it's a brand new life.
It is a brand new life, and there are many reasons why that brand new life impacts the sexual relationship. But usually, most couples are really caught off guard if they do have this discrepancy going on. And what ends up happening is that instead of knowing that's common, knowing that it's going to be complicated, as we said in our last segment, sex is complicated, sexual intimacy is complicated, and desire issues are really, really complicated. But what ends up happening, typically for couples, is they've been in this conflict with one another, and usually, not always, but usually the higher desire spouse has made the lower desire spouse feel like something is wrong with them.
Yes.
And that they're not enough, or that something's wrong because they don't desire sex as much as I do. And then the lower desire spouse has had a tendency to make the higher desire spouse feel like something's wrong with them for wanting sex too much.
All the time.
All the time.
Yeah.
And it may feel that way, that you never want sex or you only want sex.
And it just gets things so complicated because a lot of this is unspoken.
Yes.
So attribution to what they're thinking or what they're doing, so much is added to it that often is not really true.
Right. I mean, if we really unpack the conflict, it's not so much that one is higher and one is lower. What starts most of the conflicts is the attributions that are made to one another. That if the high desire spouse is making the attributions, you don't ever want sex, you're not even sexual, you could go the rest of your life without sex, you don't even know what you like sexually. And the lower desire spouse, their attributions may be to the higher desire spouse, that's all you want me for, sex is all you need, that's the most important thing to you. And I would just say that it is not fun to be the lower desire spouse on either side. Yeah. And it's complicated. We wish that, again, that desire was a simplistic issue. but it's not. Many couples come in and go, is there a switch I can flip, or is there an app for that? Yeah. It's just like give me an easy answer. Yeah. And for many of those who have low desire or lower desire, it could certainly be because of things in the past, trauma, a shame, unresolved negative scripts from the past, or unresolved guilt. And we're going to unpack some of those things in further segments.
And there's hope for all of this too.
Right.
Because even if it takes time to unpack, or if it's an easy fix, which we might discover as we talk about some of the easy fixes, there's hope for any of your issue in desire discrepancy.
Yes, there is always hope for it to change. And we'll talk about how we can create some change when that's the issue. I think it's so important, though, that we recognize that just because our spouse may have lower desire than us, for us to feel that we come in and try to pressure them, guilt them into, manipulate them into wanting, or we pout, or we're punitive when they say no, those things are never going to work for the higher desire spouse. And the more that the higher desire spouse presses in with those things, or even it's done, I just need you and want you, don't you want to show me you love me? All of those things produce guilt, manipulation, and just keep squelching the desire that the high desire person so wants. And then if the lower desire person is always saying, no, I'm not going to, you don't understand, you need to respect me, which respect is important, but what they don't realize is not looking at any of the issues that will create the anxiety in the higher desire person. And the way that looks is, I don't know when I'm ever going to get sex, so I need to ask every day. If I don't ask every day, they may not think about it.
Because that might be the one time that they're going to say yes.
And I missed asking on that day.
Oh, it's so true. It's so true.
And then the higher desire person needs to understand that the more they press in, the more they ask, the more they demand, or the more they pout, if there's hesitation, or there's another rejection with the no, that the high desire spouse is creating anxiety in the lower desire spouse. And so part of therapy is trying to help stop that cycle of creating that anxiety and that conflict with one another.
And it really does come down to teaching the couples how to communicate about this very delicate topic. Because if you can't talk about it, you can't fix it.
Right. And as we said in the last segment, that if you're just fighting about sex, but you're not talking about sex, you'll just repeat the same fight over and over, which just creates the vicious cycle of anxiousness, fear, tension, who wants disappointment, so now avoidance. It's a vicious cycle that we want to help stop.
Which brings us to the point that it's about acceptance of one another, but you have to dialogue to get that acceptance, right?
Yes. I just in the couples that I work with, I think so often what one spouse is trying to do is trying to get the other spouse to think like and feel about sex the way they do. Often men, husbands, if they're the higher desire, they want to press in and make the woman, the wife, feel like she should desire sex the way he does, that she should want sex. And unfortunately, I think some of misteaching in the church has been teaching women that it's just their wifely duty and that sex is to be duty. And unfortunately, we're going to unpack that one.
Yes, that needs a longer segment to explain what we're saying by that.
But with that, if a woman comes in and just thinks it's just my duty to serve him, and she's not ever learned her own body, there's no room for desire to grow.
And no enjoyment in it.
It's
more like, check it off the box, I was a good wife today.
And men will say, I don't want duty sex, but will you remind her it's her duty to serve me? Well, that doesn't build desire.
Right.
In fact, that's going to squelch it. And so if the lower desire person is in that space of, if you would just desire something else besides sex, then I think we'd be okay. or if you would just accept all the other ways that I love you and leave that alone, I think would be okay. So one of the things that we want to help couples recognize is we must accept each other in so many other ways that we know there's usually an extrovert and an introvert. There's usually a better saver and a better spender. There's usually someone who loves adventure and someone that's very low risk. Part of our sexual intimacy is about preferences and accepting that preferences are very different, but they're very important to be respected. And so learning to accept those differences instead of trying to change our spouse. And far too often, not just in the sexual realm, but I think so often, our idea is if I can just get my spouse to be the person I want them to be, instead of us accepting our spouse for who they are. And it's the same way sexually, for us having an acceptance that our spouse may have a higher desire, and I don't have to pathologize that, or my spouse may have the lower desire, and I don't have to pathologize that. I need to accept that their desire is different from mine.
And it's not to say that it has to stay hopeless, that
No.
it will never improve. We're not saying that, oh, this person wants it all the time, or this person never wants it, and you have to just be
No.
fine with that forever. It's
No.
a starting point, and then you work on a compromise to build the intimacy and the emotional side of the relationship.
Yes, because once we start with acceptance and then we're able to have more communication about it and we're not fighting about it,
Yes.
we can usually come to different compromises about frequency, which that's going to be a whole nother segment. But we're able to look at how we can make more times for sexual connection, because that's really what sexual intimacy is about. It's about connection. And so we want to stop the attributions and stop the conflict so we can make connection happen. When connection starts to happen, I do believe sexual intimacy happens.
And there's change, is there not?
Yes.
Because the connection, and as you were mentioning on attribution, a lot of times there's reason for low desire.
Yes.
And when the attribution is negative, in other words, when they just assume, oh, they don't want me, then it can build resentment and all this,
Yes.
and the high
Yes.
desire person feeling less than, and that causes all this problem with the intimacy of the marriage, that if that can be dealt with,
Yes.
then the marriage can get better and the desire can go up and the marriage can get more quality.
Right. I think something else that's real important is understanding that piece about the preferences and recognizing that our spouse may prefer different things than we do sexually. And if we just press in and want our spouse to prefer what it is that we prefer and try to press in, that is also going to squelch desire and squelch the opportunity for desire and intimacy to build. And so it's just real important to respect preferences.
And I don't know if this is the episode we're going to get into this, but there's also, with shame from our background or that different people have, right, where they might have thought that sex is only for procreation and that we're only allowed to have sex to have babies, and once we're done with babies we can't have sex anymore, or whatever all this stuff is.
I just have to share this. I get to speak at a lot of MOPS groups, mothers of preschools or Moms Incs, and I always get invited to speak, usually on sexual desire. What do you do when desire is gone?
Well, because when you have little babies,
it is.
You're a little distracted.
But one woman, she basically said that, and I thought she probably speaks for a lot of the women in the room, but she lifted her hand up in the back of the auditorium and said, if I've had my 4 kids and God made sex for procreation, why should I ever have to have sex again? And I kind of think there were probably many in the room who may have also thought that. And so that is going to be something that's really important in unpacking. If someone does have lower desire or no desire, of what are some of the things that have squelched that desire or have kept that person from looking at, it's okay for me to have desire besides just for procreation.
And we will clarify that yes, God made it for procreation, but he also made sex for intimacy and marriage. Yes. And all of our erogenous zones, yes, right, were not just for procreation, but for us to enjoy our spouse and them to enjoy us.
Yes, all of our erogenous zones, all of our body parts were designed with purpose. And I know we're going to unpack things a little bit more openly, and I don't want to say graphically, but graphically. But I think it's really important for understanding the things that get in the way of our beliefs about sex, or what often, like you said, negative teaching, negative scripts, being told that sex is just a duty, women being told your only duty is to serve your husband, and all of those things impact desire being able to be built or created.
And also, I think that I have found with some of the people I've worked with on this is a lot of times the attributions are wrong. People aren't really thinking those things. So right, you're misunderstanding each other. I think it all comes down to one of the important things is if we want to grow and deal with all this desire issues with our spouse, we have to be willing to look at ourselves. Yes. And look at what is going on in us, what is our baggage, what is our background, what is our view of sex, yes, that we may have been afraid to talk to our spouse about.
Right.
You know?
And I think the other part of that is for those who have a higher desire, needs to look at, have I made sex my most important need? And have I bought into the culture's design, if I'm the man and have the higher desire, have I bought into culture, Christian culture and the porn culture that teaches I should have kind of sex on demand? And it is my greatest need. And I might need to have sex every day of the week. We have to look at both of our pieces, whether the lower desire or the higher desire, has to look at self to go, what has contributed to me being the one, or one, both of us, being in conflict here, yes, yes, with false beliefs or misunderstandings, lack of knowledge, which I know we're going to do a whole one on sex education for adults, basically, because most of us come into marriage pretty ignorantly about sex.
Yeah. Because it's never talked about.
It's never talked about.
It's not really talked about at school. You get the diagrams of what it is, and we just want to encourage you to discuss it and look at it. And by being willing to talk about your sexuality, like verbally to your spouse, it's very intimate, and you are risking more intimacy, yes, just by being vulnerable to talk to them about it. Right. So we've covered 3 things this week on desire discrepancy. We've discussed that it is common and complicated.
And we've also talked about that we need to focus more on acceptance and affirmation of one another and stop creating attributions, because our attributions often create the tension because our attributions are often wrong.
And third, we want to be willing to look at ourselves, because often when we work on ourselves, because we can't fix other people, we can only fix ourselves.
And we can't change other people. Yes. We can't change our spouse. We can only change us.
So those are our 3 tips for this week. We hope you've gotten a little bit more perspective on the desire issue. We will unpack it more in future episodes, but we thought this was an important dialogue to begin with you. Tune in next week where we're going to cover more on this issue. In fact, I think we're talking about dating your spouse next week.
We are, and Victoria is going to share with us, because kind of dating is her expertise, with having written 2 books on dating. But what's so important with couples, we always hear that date nights are so important.
And
they are. And it's one of the things that couples so often stop doing. So
we can't wait to talk about that next week, because I got choked up even thinking about romantic dates. So sorry. So click subscribe below so you can know about our upcoming episodes. We are so thrilled that you joined us. Thank you so much. I'm your love and life coach, Victorya Rogers, with
Debby Wade, a certified sex therapist.
See you next time on The Sofa's Edge.